Tolkien fans were ready to riot after Rings of Power came out, and honestly, I get it, but let's just break it down and I'll give you my take on this show. The show had a very slow start. If the dwarves weren't in it, I probably would have dropped it after like 2 episodes. The pacing is one of the biggest turn-offs for people, and I totally get why. I understand they needed to do some world building and that's important for it, but they could have gotten to the point much faster. A slow burn works really well, but only when it's done right, and this show felt like it was dragging the plot in the first few episodes. Visuals and character designs. Something that will always amaze me is how Lord of the Rings was made in the late 90s and still looks incredible. Meanwhile, Rings of Power, despite having insane amounts of money thrown at it, and also obviously newer technology used, it felt very CGI heavy. It looked good, don't get me wrong, but it lacked the realness that the Peter Jackson films had, because the Peter Jackson films were filmed obviously on location, most of it, so they felt very immersive. But because this was all CGI, you could just tell when CGI was being used, and that kind of pulled me out of it sometimes, and I was like, oh right, this was filmed on a green screen, or whatever. Now, let's talk about the elves. Why did they have short hair? Bro, I was so pressed about this. One dude had a buzz cut, another guy had like a blowout perm. It was wild. They had a perfect opportunity to give the first black elf braids. It would have looked so cool. But no, they just buzzed him. Not even gonna lie, I almost dropped the show when I saw his hair because it felt so off. The elves are supposed to have this elegant, timeless, ethereal look, but some of them look like they just walked out of like, you know, a random barbershop at Indooroopilly Shopping Centre. The only time that Elrond, for example, his hair looked good was when he was literally like bleeding out on a battlefield, because that was the only time it looked real. The rest of the time it just looked like it had just been done in a barbershop. I don't know. I couldn't do it. It was too much. The dwarves though carried the show. Their design was pretty decent, not as visually striking as The Hobbit, but The Hobbit had its own concerns. For example, the way that Keely looked, like with with no beard and stuff like that. Honestly, he was absolutely gorgeous. Love that man. But this version of the dwarves looked more Tolkien accurate, and I feel like people who had complaints about the Hobbit dwarves would have actually liked the way that they were portrayed in this. Their beards, the outfit, and the general vibe that they had just looked and felt right. I just wish the rest of the show had the same level of authenticity. Now, it's not canon, and that seems to be the biggest deterrent for the hardcore Lord of the Rings fans. Long answer, it kind of ties into the established lore, but it takes a lot of creative liberties. And if you're someone who's only ever seen the movies, you could probably pretend it's canon. But honestly, I think the best way to watch this show is treat it like anime filler episodes. They don't contribute to the actual story, but they can still be enjoyable. If you go in expecting pure Tolkien accuracy, you're gonna have a horrible time. But if you take it for what it is, a high-budget fantasy drama inspired by Middle-earth, you might actually enjoy it. You never know. Give it a chance, but just change the way you're looking at it when you go into it. Because they never advertise themselves as canon, as far as I know. So for people to go in and assume it's canon, it's kind of on you. Now, the plot twists and the darker themes. One thing that made Lord of the Rings so comforting was the clear distinction between good and evil. Good was good, evil was evil. You never really had to second guess characters' intentions, and that made the journey feel solid. You kind of just could follow along without having in the back of your mind that you need to figure out the whole plot yourself. Rings of Power, not so much. There was a lot of moral grayness, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it did change the overall tone. This show was dark. Not just in a Sauron is coming way, but in how heavy and serious everything felt. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit both had serious moments, but they balanced them with lighthearted scenes. They had characters like Gimli, Merry, Pippin. They kind of just had those happy scenes where you're like, oh, okay, there's still some happiness left in the show, even though the overall message was quite serious. In Rings of Power, the only comedic relief came from the dwarves. And when I say from the dwarves, it only came from Durin and Disa. Outside of them, oh, and Elrond had a little bit of it when he was with them, but that was kind of it. It wasn't enough at all. The elves were so insanely dead serious all the time that it made their scenes feel so stiff and lifeless. I get that elves are meant to be regal and wise, but you need something to break the tension. When I think back to Lord of the Rings, Legolas and even Elrond in Lord of the Rings both had lighthearted moments, even if it wasn't straight up comedy. Just the way that they acted and like smiled at certain interactions and things like that, it broke the tension. Even when you look back to The Hobbit, and I can't remember off the top of my head if this is book accurate, but in the Hobbit movies, even Thranduil had some comedy elements without breaking any of the regal, serious moments. I won't go too much into spoilers because I want you to be able to watch this video with an open mind and then go into watching the show for the first time. But there were definitely some shocking moments and crazy plot twists. I was clutching my pearls. I was shook. Some of the twists were predictable. There was parts that was like, oh, that's cool. Kinda saw that coming, but it's still a cool part. Other parts, I was actually gasping. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, I was like audibly gasping. It was pretty funny. Overall, the story had me hooked by the end of season 1, but if I hadn't heard outside reviews and been encouraged to continue watching it after the first few episodes of season 1, I would have probably dropped it. So, is it worth watching? Honestly, yes. I was a huge hater in the beginning. Like, I spoke to some of my friends about it and I was like, why do the elves look like this? Like, what's going on? Why is it so slow? But by the end of season 1, I was pretty invested, and season 2, I was sold. It was really good. It's just that initial slow burn. But if you can get past that, I promise the plot does pick up and it gets a lot better. The way that one of my friends pitched it to me was something to fill the void left by Lord of the Rings, and that's exactly what it did. I had just finished watching all 6 extended editions and I needed something to keep the obsession going, and this show delivered to that. It wasn't perfect, I obviously had my complaints, but it did fill that void while I wrote out this hyperfixation. If I had to rate the show, it would probably be an 8 out of 10. It lost points for the slow pacing in season 1 and character design choices, of course, and also how dark it was. Overall, it was a solid watch. I would recommend it. Would I watch season 3 if it continues the way that it's going right now? Absolutely. One thing I am worried about is that it's going to get to end of season 3 or maybe season 4 and it's going to start feeling like the show is dragging again, because I think it's at a dangerous point now in the plot where they can either wrap it up with another season or they can keep delaying it and it's going to go back to the same vibe it had at the beginning of season 1, where the plot just keeps getting dragged to try and extend out to more and more seasons, and it's going to be a Riverdale kind of situation. That's kind of what I think is going to happen because it's Amazon. I have a feeling it's going to be dragged out, but I'm hoping it ends with season 3 and it's a good end. Hit that subscribe button because I will be doing an update for when a trailer eventually drops for season 3. I do weekly videos. I have been a little bit slack, but I do weekly videos usually. And I also do Twitch streams. So make sure you join the Discord as well to keep up to date with all of that stuff. I will see you guys next week. Love you. Bye bye.